Okay, so last week we created a database. We created this database, the tutorial waiting list one. I should do what I say and make sure that that is backed up before I start. So I'm going to shut it down. You see, there's two files here: the waiting list and the waiting list. ACD. Make sure you're carrying. You always care about the big one. The big one. So I'm going to Control C and Control V to copy that, uh, so that we end up with a duplicate of that. Uh, Copy, paste it. So we have one for today. Today is what's the date today? The 4th of August. 4 August 2020. Lovely. So that's what we're working on today. That's our big fat database. We're going to enable content. So we created this database last week. It's got patient details, patient waiting list, urgency code, and waiting list type. Yeah, and so these three patient details is a lookup table that looks up the patient ID but returns all the patient information. Urgency code is a lookup table that returns the urgency code. Waiting list type is a lookup table that returns those four things. Coronary spelled wrong. And patient waiting list is the overall table. So each record in this is one person on some waiting list, and so for example, we're going to put this person, Polly Polite, on to as an urgent person on the waiting list for coronary artery bypass. The blank means that she is not finished; she's still on the waiting list, and the date active is going to be today, August 4th. Fantastic, great. So this person is on the waiting list. That's a great thing. Now the problem is that we put no error checking into this database. We have no error checking whatsoever, and so the idea is to do as much error checking as possible. You want the error checking to happen at the database level. So for example, in this field here, okay, I can't just pick anything. Sometimes 1239999. So yeah, so it says I can't enter anything in that list. That's great. So it makes sure that I can't enter anything in that list. I've got to pick something from that list. So that's great. So those are pretty well error checked. You can only pick something from the list. The error is depends on what's in the other databases. Similarly here, I try to put let's say a W in there. Oh, it let me put a W in there. So that's a mistake. I'm pretty sure W is not one of the things on that list. So there's a problem there. It allows me to put in garbage, and if you get garbage in, you get garbage out. Your database is not good. Here, similarly here, uh, it allows you to just put anything in you want. This one also is very well error checked because there's only two values, on and off. How could you error check this? Well, one thing is you don't want the date active. You don't want to be able to, you know, do you want to be able to post date people? Do you want to say that somebody is active on the waiting list last year, for example? Let's say we want this person to rise to the top of the waiting list. We say they've been on the waiting list for a year now. Is that legal? Yes, it is. Now you have to think about the business rules. What business rules are you going to put in here? Well, generally you're going to talk to the business owner. You're going to say, well, what information do you want there? Do you want to have a default of today? So all that can be done at the database level. And so let's go into the design of that and have a look at that. So we go into the design of that, and we can see we've got all these fields. They've all got the right length because they've got the length of whatever the previous data table was. Urgency code is 1 because the other one was 1. Waiting list type is 4 because it was 4. So the first problem we had was that we could just type in any old urgency code there. And now if we go into the lookup tab, this actually controls the lookup. And it says, for example, it says the bound column means that it's going to put the urgency code, the first column, into the database. It's going to actually store that thing, whatever's in the first column of the urgency code table. If we go look at the urgency code table, the first column is that. And so that's the urgency code. That's what it's going to actually store in the database, which is good because that's unique. There's 3 columns output entirely, 1, 2, 3, and the widths of the columns are 0.95, 5.74, and 0 cm. So 0 cm means means don't display it. It means hide it. So that's a uh, something you can use, for example, if you want to hide it. I'll show you. If we go to patient ID there, you see that the first column is hidden, the patient ID. So even though it's in the query, it's actually bound. It gets stored in the database. If you go look at that patient ID, it'll actually have the ID number. It won't have the UR number stored in it. You can tell because it's a number. The UR number is text, and the ID number is a number. So that's what gets actually stored as the patient ID, but you don't see it because it's hidden at 0 cm. So that's a thing. In fact, I'll trade that. I'll put that as the 1 cm, and we'll go back into the view of the thing. We'll save the table, and now you can see it's actually storing the patient ID. When I do the lookup, you can see the patient ID there. We don't actually care about 38 and 50, so we will go back and change it again back to 0, so we can hide that. So that's how Access hides those things. How many rows is it going to list? How many columns it's going to list? Allow multiple values. You sort of break the relational nature of the database if you say yes there. So don't do that. And limit to list. So limit to list. Yes. So in this case, the patient IDs tables, it defaulted to limit to list yes, which is correct. But in urgency code, it did not limit to list. So we want to change that to yes. We don't want them to be able to just put in any old urgency code. And same with waiting list type, we want that to be limit to list yes. Allow value list edits. Do you want to allow editing of the list items? No, we don't want to allow editing of the list items. That's just completely insane. We want to lock our database down. So similarly with urgency code, we want to lock that down to no. So these are just some of the defaults that you want to in the wizard that you want to change. You don't want people to be able to add urgency codes or waiting list types. Sometimes you might, but in this case you don't. And great. I think that's what that. Yeah, that's good. So now we've changed that dynamics. We can go back into there. We can try to put in a W here, and it's going to say no, it doesn't exist. So you'll notice that it didn't. Despite that, we've still got garbage in the database from before. We've got the W there. So if you get stuck in this case, you can press escape and get out of it, and it closes the adding the new record. We've still got the W there. That is illegal now. If I try to click, yeah, even though yeah. So we want to delete that old record because it's broken. Great. Cool. So that's fixed that problem. What's the other problem is the date problem. So how do we make it so that the date is correct? Well, first thing is, what's the business rule? So let's say they can't put a date in that's over a year old. So how do we do that? We say validation rule, and then we say things like, there's a little formula you can put in here. So we can say greater than now means that it has to be past today, past the current time. So I save the table, I click on that, yes, I want to test the, yeah, so it's saying this value doesn't pass the rule. That's okay. So so now when I try to put in yesterday, for example, and I try to go away from that, it says one of our values are prohibited by the validation rule greater than now set for patient list. So it's not a very good message, but at least it tells us you can't backdate it. But we want to be able to backdate. So we press escape again, we get out of that. We want to be able to backdate that. So let's say greater than now minus 365. So it has to be greater than some date that's in the past, 365 days in the past. And validation text, it says this is the error message that'll show up. So you can say you cannot backdate date active more than 1 year. So just to finish that up, after my phone call so rudely interrupted me, you cannot backdate date active by more than 1 year. So now when I go into the design of that table, I can change the date to something that's very old. For example, last year, 2019, I try to say, just says it gives me that error message, the error message that I specified. Now when I go back to today,
for example, February 2nd, that's less than a year. Alexa, stop. So that did that error message, that fixed that up. We can put in those things. Great, so we've got data in there. Now the last thing I want to do is I want to show you is to how to make the data kind of beautiful. So we've got our descriptions here. And but something that's very useful to do at this point is to change the caption. So the caption, we don't have to change the caption to waiting list ID because we don't use it, but patient ID, patient on the waiting list. So the caption for that should be patient UR numbers. The caption for urgency code should be probably urgency code. So oftentimes the description and the caption are the same, but what happens if we change the caption? If we change the caption, then we go into the design of the table, you'll see that it's actually doesn't show the code anymore, it shows the ID. So you want to change all the captions, you want to change the descriptions, you want your table to be proper and nice and have all the proper things in it. So that's what you're going to do. Let's just go through it, finish that up. Type of waiting list. Escape. And we want type of waiting list down there as well. You might make it a bit shorter, so then so it's a bit easier to describe. Waitlist is active. So the default value should be yes for that one. We want it to be true, so that so because they generally want to be default to be active. Or you could say that, yeah, that's good, and then date. So after the second phone call, we can actually start talking about how to do the tutorial. So we've made this database much better. We've documented it. I just wanted to show you that so that you kind of knew what to do when you started documenting your own database. We've got our 4 tables, and now we need to create some forms to do data entry into those tables. So we close that, our database, and we start making some forms. So we could do the data entry directly into this. That is totally possible. You could add a person in there. But really, what we really want to do is we want to be able to enter the data into a form that's a little easier to look at. So the first thing to do is we'll create a form for the urgency table to show you what that looks like. So we get to we go create form. We're going to use the wizard again for the forms. We go to urgency code. What fields do we want in our form? We want all the fields, and then we say next. The one we're going to make is we're going to get justified one, so the fields are along the top, and you'll see, and the urgency codes is the name of the table. So this is what, if you were going to add new urgency codes, you would put them into this form. We're going to view the form design. So this is what it looks like, fully justified. You'll see that, Obviously, I did something wrong because I think because I did its full justification. Let me go back and do that again. Close that. F2, Control C. We're going to delete that. Let's try that again. Create a form wizard. We want urgency table. We want all the fields next. Tabular, columnar. I think columnar is what I show in the tutorial. Urgency codes. Finish that. Yeah, that's more like it. And so that gives you this. It has each box for the certain size that you want. Like it knows that that's small, so it gives me a small box for that, and that's the final screen for data entry. Now, because we haven't created captions for these are a bit ugly, so we can clean them up. We can go into we can clean them up in the layout view. We can actually edit them in the layout view. Urgency. It's a little easier sometimes to do things in the layout view. You can also edit them in the design view. Urgency description. So you can see there's more detail in the design view. And priority. Oftentimes you won't have a form for these particular tables because they're just lookup tables, and you can do the data entry into the actual table themselves. But I'm just sort of showing you this to do that. So now we go back to the design view, and you can see the codes are better. So the waiting list form would be useful to show the waiting list for a certain type of waiting list. So, for example, I could just create a very simple waiting list form for the entire waiting list, patient waiting list. I could go into create form wizard and just add all those fields. Generally, you wouldn't add the waiting list ID because it's sort of a hidden field, but you could. So that would allow you to put things on the waiting list. You just have to choose what waiting list type. But generally, you kind of want to be able to see everybody that's on a certain waiting list. You want to categorize it. You want to group it by waiting list. And that's where you have a form, subform, a paradigm. So let me show you what that looks like. First thing we do is we want to create a form using the form wizard, and we want to start off with the waiting list type. We want these things to be on the waiting list type. They're supersets of the we want the waiting list for a certain type, and then we choose the patient waiting list, and then we want those fields as well. So we want the type, the code. We actually don't want waiting list type because we've got that already on the form. Do I? I did include it anyways. I'm not sure why I did, but it was status and data. So we want everything except for the ID. Now we've got two sets of data, and it says I can tell that you want a form and a subform. So we want it by the waiting list. Do we want the waiting list and the types by that, or do we want because we can see that this is a many-to-one relationship. We've got each one of these has got many of these, so that's what we want to end up with. And say next, and there's only two choices for the form and subform. The subform is going to look like a data sheet, or look just like a data sheet, but you can also make it look like a table as well. I think we'll data sheet because it's sort of simpler. And then what do you want the names of them to be? So we want the outer form to be called waiting list by types, and this is subform, we'll call it. We don't actually see that ever in the design. So great. So now we've got the waiting list type and the waiting list description. It's a bit misaligned, and these are all the different people on the CABG waiting list. So there's two forms here. There's the form there's the form here, which has got all the people that are on the waiting list. So we can add someone to that, the CABG waiting list. Denise Dyer, she's urgency R, and date active today, tomorrow. Great. So we've done that. We've added that person to the waiting list. Now we can go to the next waiting list, which is here, which is this form, and that's the hip replacement. There's nobody on the hip replacement waiting list. It defaults to that type, the hip replacement type, and we'll say that this is somebody who's so now we need to clean this up. We need to clean this up to make it correct. So we want to make the form changes. We want to make things beautiful. So the first thing we do is we go into the layout view and we change some things around. One thing is we're going to make this a bit wider so we can see everything at once on it. That would be useful. We're going to probably move it down over here just so that it fits more on the page a bit better. I think that's what I would do. The patient waiting list type is quite a narrow field. I'm not sure we actually need to have that on the field. Urgency code also is quite small. Patient UR is a bit narrow as well. Date active. So we actually don't need that much space because all of that stuff fits pretty well. Hip replacement, we can make that a bit smaller because the descriptions they're not necessarily 255 wide. The code, that might be useful. We actually don't want people to add codes here because that would be a bit rude to add different types of waiting lists. So we might want to make these things read only. So that's under here. Format. Is it data? Enabled. Yeah, I think we say enabled no. And then it turns to gray and it means you can't change it. Great. So now when I try to type it in, it's just a display. I probably wouldn't want to change the descriptions there. So what we're doing is we're just adding people onto that waiting list. I probably would also do the same thing for this column. We don't want people to be able to change that. So that they can change they can add the urgency, but they can't change the type of waiting list they're on. And there's more edits you can do to make things beautiful. You can do that in the design screen. Now, if you go into the design of this, let's go into the design. You'll actually see that the would you save the changes? Yes to all. So this is what it looks like underneath it. Even though we're not looking at it in this order, in this format, when we go back to the design, you can see it looks like it's in datasheet view, but that's what it looks like here. So you're just actually changing the fields in here, and so there's no. It looks a bit funny in the design view. Yeah, but here you can also change the title and things like that, and make things line up. I would definitely make things line up. You probably want to make that a bit wider. Yeah. 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 Oh, okay. Yeah, good. What else did I do? I think in the original one, I see. I want to add in the patient name, for example. So, there we go. So, let's say we pop up the patient UR number there, and we want to add in the patient name. So, where's that going to go? It's going to go somewhere in there, in the middle there. Let's go into the design view. We might be able to do it in this view, but the design view is pretty simple. So we go into the design view, we say form design tools, we want to add existing fields. So right now we've got the waiting list type, the waiting list description. Those are the fields that are in that view. If I click on that view there, well, we want to show all tables. And so we can see that we've actually linked in the patient waiting list table, but we've also got fields in the patient details table and the urgency code table. So let's grab the surname and given name, drag the surname in there, put it somewhere in the subform. Choose if we want to relate patient details to. So there's something wrong. It shouldn't be related to patient details. It should be related to. It should be related to waiting list type. It should be related to patient. So we're going to cancel that. Let's try that again. Drag surname into the subform. And it's trying to connect it to that. So let's choose the subform and drag the surname in there. And it's still trying to connect to patient waiting list type. Cancel. Edit table. No, that's not what I want. I don't want to edit the table because that's got the actual data in the table. Show only fields in the current record source. Show all tables. See, patient details is related to patient waiting list. And yeah. Yeah, we want to get it in there somehow. So we need a relationship to that thing. Yeah, I think I'm going to start over again. This is what happens sometimes. We'll save that. Yes, I want to make changes to it. So now we've created a bunch of, we've got waiting list by type form, which is what that form looks like. We've got the sub forms. We've got the patient waiting list form. We've created a few of those. Let's make some more. So create a form. We're going to use the form wizard. We're going to take everything from the waiting list type table. We're going to grab the patient waiting list table, and we're going to select everything from there. And we're also going to pull in the something from the patient details table. We're going to grab the surname and the given name from the patient details table. Now that should, yes, so now all the patient details is under there. We want to go by waiting list type. And so now we should end up with those fields in there. We're going to say it's a datasheet form, say finish. So now we can see the people's names in there. Sometimes you just got to start over again, and then you would do the same things that you did to that table to the other table. You would lock those fields, and you would lock those fields, and just make it pretty. And that's it for this section of the tutorial.